Hey everybody, welcome. There's a little path here with colored circles. I think it's supposed to be a caterpillar. Though not all caterpillars have antennae. Or antennae? I don't know. I always thought that antennae were like what humans use them for. You know, radio transmission and reception. And even though I didn't have it right, it's not entirely wrong either. Because mostly what they're for is the reception of molecular signals. They're chemosensors. And some of them are staggeringly sensitive. I've heard that wasps can sense a single molecule of a substance some number of miles away. It's evening, and sometimes in the evening the camera doesn't work the same for some reason. It seems to use less resolution. I'm not sure why that is, though. I'm a technical guy. I spent a lot of my life optimizing, installing, and repairing Apple networks. Some of my life, anyway. In the beginning, it was difficult to move information between computers. But nature's been moving something that isn't merely information between bodies for so much time that it's impossible to conceive of how much time there was, because time in nature can't ever be the flat kind of time that humans think about. So the actual age of the universe, if understood in biotime or relational time, is explosively enormous. It's actually like an ongoing fusion explosion of bigness that gets bigger so quickly that it's impossible to track its growth. And this is the kind of time that happens if you do the accounting more reasonably, right? If you account for every organism as a unique participant in time. And even if the Earth is the only place in the universe with organisms, which is wildly unlikely in my view, there's been so much time since the beginning of life. The flat version of the count is around 3.6 billion years. That means if there was just one organism and it was there the whole time while the Earth was going around the sun, and it was the only thing that participated in time, there would be 3.6 billion years. human years, human experiential years. It's weird that we learned to account time this way, or that we somehow decided to account time this way. It demonstrates a glaring array of oversights about the nature of relation and temporality. And since temporality is fundamentally about relation, without relation there is no time, it's surprising that our people got something this important this wrong. No two organisms experience the same minute. The minute is unique for each of them. Therefore, if we are going to count time, we need to count it at some rate appropriate to an organism or two organisms. And if we set the human standards as the standard, 1 second on Earth, if we include all the organisms, cells, viruses, insects, etc., is more time than we can make numbers about. In fact, 1 second in a single human body is an inconceivably gigantic amount of time. And that's only if we, let's say we just count the cell time at the cell rate per second for the approximately 60 trillion cells in our body. Who knows exactly what the cell rate per second is, but for a cell, because it's so small and in its way so molecularly sophisticated, we might imagine that a second is at the very least a minute for a cell, a human second, and it could be as much as an hour or possibly even a day. So that's a lot of time per second in our bodies. I've often spoken of how I understand the living world as the embodied expressions of the nature of time-space. But I think of organisms as living embodiments of time, different forms of time. Different kinds of organisms are different forms of time, and they are intimately in relation in time and space. Antennae are one part of that relationship. And some might argue, well, those are primarily used to locate food or prey and or mate, mating opportunities. Not untrue, but that isn't all they sense. Just like us, they sense the ambient nature of the situation, right? Circumstance. Now, if we take just one human body and we conceive of it as the approximately, 65 trillion cells, we leave out the viruses, we pretend the organs are just collectives of cells and so on, then we get some rate per second of time that's really difficult to imagine the scope of, the quantification of. It's probably more time, it's almost certainly more time than the flat number of years that we estimate to be the age of the universe, which is 14.5 billion years. So that means your body, in a second, is making more time than the humans have conceived of as the age of the universe. And even if it's not doing that in a second, in an hour, it almost certainly is, And in a day, it must be exceeding that amount of time. But that's only if we consider the individual cells. And in order to get that number, we have to exclude all of the domains of relation between those cells and the rates of those relationships over time. If we try to include those numbers, even for a single organism like a human being, the amount of time per second becomes ridiculous, inconceivable, a number that can't be a number. And again, it has the same problem as the universe. It's growing so quickly that it's actually not a number at all. It's a rate, it's some kind of exponential rate of self-expansion or something. And if you wonder about like the speed of light, right? Which I don't think what light is doing is traveling, by the way. I think it's doing something else. It's not travel. And so I don't really believe that light has a speed, though I understand and don't reject our current, knowledge about light and physics and relativity and so on. And a lot of that stuff's very interesting. Yet we must imagine that it's quite primitive compared to what it's possible for us to understand. And so we have to use relativity to reach beyond it, I think, if we're curious and if these questions matter to us, and they certainly matter to me. I'm fascinated by these things and always have been, because they are the fundamental, in a way they are fundamental puzzles about existence. But if we imagine that light So Arthur Young, in his book The Reflexive Universe, posited that what we understand about physics might be a puzzle that we could reframe in order to see that by giving up some degrees of liberty in certain dimensions, light gains new forms of liberty in other dimensions. And so you can imagine a V-shaped graph where you have something like, at the top on the left, light, then quanta, atoms, molecules, plants, mammals, humans up the other side. And the going down on the left represents the investment of certain forms of liberty, such as that we might associate with the speed at which light propagates in a vacuum. Those forms of liberty are getting invested in to produce other kinds of liberty. For example, the kind that produces embodied beings. And this is a really interesting toy. Arthur Young was a brilliant prodigy who was also fascinated with these questions. I'm not claiming that he got it right, but it's a very interesting toy and it's a useful toy. And we might imagine that, for example, in terms of the amount of time generated in a human body, in a moment, in an instant, we are actually traveling faster than light. We have violated the relativistic barrier of C by producing so much time in a local little container, localized little community of integrally intimate organisms and their supercultures like organs. I mean, organism, organ, right? That what's actually going on in our bodies that produces consciousness is the constant and effulgent overcoming of the light space-time barrier. Think about it, if you can. There are also forms of transpresence. And the antennae of the insects, right? If the wasp senses a molecule of a substance 5 miles away, the wasp is touching something 5 miles away from its body, its very small body. And it doesn't have trillions of cells. It probably has a billion cells, maybe. So there are forms of transpresence that are available to organisms, meaning existing at multiple locations simultaneously. And we have this idea, and it's a very unfortunate idea because it's wrong, that our minds are distinct possessions local only to our own bodies. Not true. That's the current status of rational thought. That rational thought comes from an aspect of consciousness that is highly invested in denying certain other aspects that would certainly succeed at overwhelming it if it did not keep them in check with logical arguments. My point is, there's something more than just minds. There's probably something more than just souls. And souls are not possessions, nor are minds. Souls are, and minds are the result of participation in something so magnificent that any attempt to expose it would obliterate our lexicons, our conceptual, our library of conceptual ideas would be destroyed outright if we were to but glimpse the actual nature of what's going on. And they would be replaced with very simple, in a sense, simple aspects of awareness and ideas and models that would give us direct access to each other's, well, they would give us direct access not only to the interiority of other beings, they would give us direct access to other forms of intelligence that are native to the universe of time-space. And I believe we once had this access as a people and we lost it. And religions are the result of those problems. And I don't believe that because I have a theory about it. I believe that because I have experience of these things. Or I once had experience of these things over a long period of time. And now what I have is primarily memories of that experience and ideas about those memories. However, the minds we have, even without having our lexicon of categories destroyed, are capable of directly touching other minds. Minds in other animals, the living essence of other beings in plants and insects, in rivers and oceans, in mountains, in the sun, in the moon, in time-space itself, but particularly other human beings. And part of what that means is that it is possible for us to recover these abilities together and learn something that makes the idea of psychism look tediously primitive. We can form minds in networks, and in case it isn't obvious, that's what the internet is a counterfeit of. Our minds are the result of participation in the supralog of a network and networks that is alive and non-mechanical. Our souls, and those are most likely complex things, not singular things. Our bodies have many organs. I suspect that whatever we might reasonably refer to as a soul is a similar thing. It has many organs and they do different things. one of those organs can touch other minds directly. Another of those organs can be present in multiple places at once. Another of those organs can sense both histories and futures along particular timelines. Another of those organs can become pregnant and give birth to some kind of transcendental entity. Another of those organs is used to travel between lives when we die, and so on. And these are just toys of what's going on. I'm not telling you these are the facts, or this is what I want you to believe. These things I am saying are very modest sketches of a situation too shocking to attempt to describe in language. It has to be experienced directly. And there are ways for us to experience it. And some of our experiences, particularly dreaming and orgasm and other forms of, I'm going to reserve the intoxicated form for a different conversation, non-intoxicated ecstasy. In other words, ecstasies produced without the use of drugs. Many of these things, particularly orgasm, are moments of brief participation at an order above that is ordinarily accessible to us. We who have lost, in a way, we are like, our souls are like the ants that lost their wings a long time ago, right? And now they crawl on the ground. And there's a weird passage in Genesis where the being who dwells in unity is apparently giving out curses, though I doubt this is actually what's going on. And that being curses the snake to thereafter crawl upon its belly. One wonders, really, what was it doing before that? And of course we have this idea of dragons, right, which are winged reptiles. In any case, my point is, I think we had 15 different kinds of wings. Our whatever we refer to as our soul was multi-winged, and it had many ways of traveling, relating with, gathering information, sensing, celebrating, and participating in the anciently evolved networks of intelligence in time-space. And there was some kind of an accident or transformation, which may have been the onset of representational cognition and the establishment of a kind of demonic mind that thinks in terms of concepts and language and models and explanations. That demonic mind, the onset of that particular aspect of awareness and consciousness, which happens to each of us again in childhood. We all undergo this. We begin with the precursor intelligence that probably still has its wings, and we acquire from peers and culture and our parents, we undergo in languaging and enculturation, and that essentially destroys those wings for most of us. Although parts of them remain, and parts of them can be preserved, and some people preserve whole wings. And some of those people can demonstrate this preservation by telling us things they should not be able to know. For example, my friend Marla Fries, she has some very unusual theories about why this is true, extremely unusual, and I don't believe her theories at all. But she was able to, in a single conversation, without asking me any questions, guide me through my home and tell me what was in each room and who each room belonged to, and without making an error. She made 17 statements in a row, and every one of them was correct, including what I could see out my back window. Marla has certainly never been to my house and knows nothing about its layout. Even if she knew its layout, she couldn't know who does what in which room. So she was using a feature of what I'm talking about to achieve transpresence, and It's not clear she could have done that if I wasn't in my home. It's possible, even that's plausible, but what she was doing wasn't a trick. She was demonstrating one of the old faculties, and the faculty is, in modern times, thought of under the rubric of remote viewing. But it's a natural faculty to human beings, and there are hundreds of such faculties that we have lost. So we are born in childhood with the potential for all of these faculties intact. We acquire representational cognition. This divides us against ourselves internally, and we end up with a very a very crippling and crippled prosthesis dominating the degrees of liberty and forms of intellectual, sensorial, and liberty of awareness that would otherwise be entirely natural to all of us, though each of us would uniquely embody and demonstrate it just as we do with anything that humans do. Our souls. So, there's another weird thing going on around here that I think we've got kind of backwards. We seem to think that our body and our incarnation is the important thing, and our soul or our mind or our awareness is the vague thing, right? And that it's a property of our body. The body produces, the brain produces consciousness, ego, awareness. That's not an unreasonable view. I just think it's not true. It's not true enough, anyway. More likely, the body is a library of intelligences that over evolutionary time set up the brain for various slightly exotic or novel purposes, including mating. If you look at the evolution of life on Earth, you find that brains occur very late in evolution. For 6/7 of the history of life on Earth, there were no brains. The primary organ of knowing was the gut, and possibly even organs in cells, organelles. The tiniest things are incredibly intelligent in how they are capable of relating with material reality directly, right? Not in how they're thinking, in how they relate directly. So that kind of intelligence is embodied. It's not like consciousness. But the picture I'd like to paint for you inverts the way we ordinarily think. And again, I'm not trying to tell anyone what I think is true or what they are to believe. I'm trying to give people access to perspectives that are incredibly useful to play with and pursue because they lead beyond themselves, possibly into direct experience, and that's what I truly hope for. Although that experience is very dangerous for ordinary people to have without a cohort that's well educated in the process of being exposed to the nature of intelligence in time-space. Ordinary people would have their minds destroyed by that experience. Very few of them would survive. It's a bit like, salmon trying to swim up Niagara Falls. They're pretty good at swimming up waterfalls in general. Bears pick them off. Other predators pick them off. They get injured. Some percentage of them make it back up the waterfall, but no salmon swims up Niagara Falls and makes it, right? And yet, it is possible for individual humans to have an experience like this, to travel back up the tree or the ladder of origin and glimpse the world of origin, to put simple language around it. And it's its families and participants. So the image I want to make is that rather than the soul being a prosthesis of the body is a prosthesis of the soul, right? The body, it's as if the soul has many tentacles, and each tentacle has a unique form and unique functions and purposes and abilities. And our body is just one of those tentacles that the soul sends down into material existence to educate itself with the experiences and relationships and the formation of identity and an ego and selfness and so on that can only happen in a material context, right? So this body that I'm speaking to you through is the very tip of a complex tentacle of my soul in this model. And this is the tentacle that explores material existence, right? And when we are dreaming, you can understand it as moving up like one level above the sort of foot that my body comprises. It's like the tentacle has a foot on the end, very complex foot, right? It has hands and eyes and all these things. And that foot is my body. And that goes through experiences in material existence, right? The soul is affected by those experiences in that it is informed and instructured by them, but it is not subject to birth or death, right? It doesn't have a beginning or an end in any ordinary sense. Yeah? It's a participatory element in a meta-network of beings. And those beings are atemporal. They don't exist in time. They participate in time, but they are free from the boundaries of time and location. So this is one toy, right? And as it is now getting darker, I will probably begin to wrap up my video. But before I do, I just want to say a couple of things. It's probably true that our holidays are phony. Excuse me. In that we just sort of made them up, us Westerners. But they're not entirely phony. They orbit transformations in nature and time that are perennial. And many of their roots are profound. So that, and also, when we agree to things as humans, it has great power, this agreement. So if we agree to celebrate our gratitude for life and for our food and for the land and for for being alive, for the sun, for the sky, for having each other still in our lives, that's very powerful. It doesn't matter what the Hallmark card version looks like, right? When we make and enact these agreements, it becomes holy in that way, whether it was or wasn't, no matter what the story is. People can jump up and down yelling about, whatever they want to yell about to reject the wrapper of Thanksgiving or Christmas. That doesn't change the fact that these holidays have ancient roots, and when we agree to celebrate together, it is powerful and it can be beautiful. So I like to remember the beauty and the power of our agreement and the essential intelligence of demonstrating gratitude for the fact that we can all continue to be fed, or most of us can be fed, certainly some far better than others. That's an unfortunate reality that it would be wonderful to see transform so that everyone could have food all the time and shelter and basic necessities. However, it's complicated because A, there are a great huge number of humans, and B, there's an explosive proliferation of objects and machines. And that B part is really a major part of the reason why we can't all have food and shelter. Our species is busy propagating objects and machines. In any case, the spirit of giving thanks is beautiful. And I wish everyone to have, I hope for everyone that they can have a feeling of joy and a moment of celebration together with others who love them and who they love during the holidays. So too, the idea of Santa Claus, it seems absurd, yet in my life, it is not absurd. Someone kind of from the North Pole came and gave me a bunch of toys one time, and those toys have changed my ability to think about what it means to be human, and I like to share them with other people. And I'm not saying that it was Santa Claus, but it was kind of resembled Santa Claus in some of its activities. So, yeah. Who knows? And of course, as most people are aware, Christmas is painted on top of the winter solstice. So these holidays have roots that are deep, even if their wrapping is commercialized or colonial or modernized. And I would say, let us celebrate the roots, and we can worry about the wrappers when and if it's necessary to do so. So I wish you all wonderful holidays, and wonderful everydays, and beautiful mornings and afternoons and evenings, and love and joy and liberation and virtue, and wonder and awe and bliss, even in the delicate continuum of our humanity, in which we certainly will encounter terrifying problems and loss and death and illness and all of the difficult aspects of our lives, poverty and being dominated and isolation and confusion and all of these things. May the divine beings surround you with their loving kindness and protections and blessings in every moment of your thought and speech and action and concern this day and all your days. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye for now.